The wife and I moved to Haydenfield in late May of this year, and neither of us knew too much about the town before we relocated. Laura, my wife, was a wandering nurse who thought it was time to settle down at a real center and learn more sustainable hours. Haydenfield just happened to be the closest town with the cheapest homes near her clinic. As for me, I only create models for myself and design websites for different companies. All my work is done wherever my computer is, so I didn't mind moving wherever Laura liked. When she told me about Haydenfield, I was just as excited as she was. The whole town basically consisted of a small subdivision with a linked cul-de-sac, the only other house being a small family-owned shop down the road. The average age of a person in Haydenfield was well into their late 60s and 70s, making it a quiet, old, and private place, surrounded by beautifully dense woodland. It was perfect for just the two of us. Our house was a 2-story continental style, set right in the center of the main cul-de-sac. It had a bit of age to its design, but it was well kept, and besides, it was a cheap buy. The previous owner had passed away from natural causes a few months prior. Her name was Nancy, and she had lived until 73. The in-home death didn't bother Laura or me very much, as death was a part of Laura's work. And for me, the thought of death never really bothered me. Our moving day was a pretty standard affair. Our entire past life fit into a medium-sized storage van. We started unpacking our things from the bus sometime in the early afternoon, and it wasn't until late evening that we had all the boxes inside our new place. Seeing all of our belongings strewn across the floor, not even filling up a single empty living room, left us feeling a certain way. I'd like to say it was a feeling of hope and excitement for a new start, but in fact, it was more that sense of realization that all our worldly possessions really meant nothing when laid out before us. Instead of confronting that foreboding sense of dread, it was easier to collect more junk to pretend our lives had more meaning than they actually did. That's what Laura and I decided to do anyway. Once the moving was finished, we kicked back on our tiny little sofa, surrounded by a sea of boxes in an otherwise empty living room. We didn't have too much to say to each other that night. The long day of hauling boxes left us tired. Just as we were about to close our eyes together, we heard a knock on the door. It took me a few seconds to gather myself, but I pushed up and felt my back crack with every little movement. I knew I'd be sore for a while, but I pressed on to the front door. I opened the deadbolt and pulled open the thick wooden frame. "Hello, friend," a voice filtered toward me. It was an old voice, steady like sandpaper. My eyes locked with the gaze of my visitor, an elderly man with a face wrinkled with deep valleys and shadows cast by the setting sun. He wore a wide-brimmed black hat and a dark overcoat that hung over his skinny shoulders. He smiled, putting forth the effort typical of a man who had reached that ancient stage of life. "Hey, sorry, we just moved in," I replied. "I don't think we've met yet. Is there anything I can do for you?" I asked the aged senior. He shook his head in steady dismissal. No, nothing like that. I just wanted to give you a warm welcome to Haydenfield. My name is John Clark. I'm the block president here." He extended one of his long hands toward me. I took his hand in mine and shook it. His skin felt like oiled leather, but his grip was strong. "Well, thank you for the welcome. Sorry we didn't have time to meet the neighbors yet. We had a pretty busy day," I said. John tightened his lips and nodded in understanding. Nonsense. We should be apologizing to you. Had we been younger, we would have helped you out with those boxes. I think those times are long past us now, though, he said with a half-hearted chuckle. Listen, we pride ourselves in this town on our hospitality. If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask. My wife Mary and I love having friends, and we live in that blue house right next door. I gave a small, tired smile back to the old man. Thanks, John. I'll pass that on to my wife. Good. To tell you the truth, none of us even lock our doors at night. I promise you, if you need anything at all, just walk right in. His smile faltered slightly, a twitch at the end of his words, as his eyes focused deeply into mine. Well, I respect that offer, but I promise we'll knock first, I replied, with a half-hearted laugh. The old man's expression didn't change. Whatever makes you feel more comfortable here, just remember to always keep hospitality first. Around here, we're all guests within each other's homes. He squeezed my hand tightly, making me realize he had never let go in the first place. Be safe, he said, his rough hand tightening over mine one last time before he finally let go. The old man dipped his chin slightly in a small bow of respect, his wide-brimmed hat dipping below his eyes and casting his face into total darkness. Our doors are open for you, Gregory, at any time, no matter the hour. With that, John swung around and turned back toward my driveway, his black jacket billowing off his small frame with graceful elegance. I squinted my eyes toward him, trying to find the words to express the strange feeling I had about the situation. Something about that interaction had left me feeling terribly uncomfortable, though I couldn't quite place my finger on it. Slowly, I shut the door and locked the deadbolt behind the old man. I shook off the nerves that tumbled down my spine and returned to the empty living room of my new home. Laura had found herself lying half asleep on the couch, her body sprawled across the cushions. Who was that? Her small voice murmured toward me. A neighbor. His name's John. He lives in that blue house, right next to ours, with his wife. Laura twisted her body and stretched out on the empty couch, yawning as her words pushed past her inhale. Oh, was he nice? She asked through her tired tone. Yeah, he just seems a little strange. I paused for a moment, judging how much space was left on the couch past Laura's small frame. Hey, let's head upstairs before we both pass out down here. Otherwise, one of us is going to end up sleeping on the floor. Laura laughed before pushing herself up. We both went upstairs to our empty bedroom. The only thing we had set up was a queen-size box spring with a matching mattress that lay on top of it. The box spring had found itself carelessly resting on the hardwood floor. We ended up sluggishly making our normal nest of pillows and blankets, and before long, we were both blacked out for the night. It wasn't until a few hours later that I felt a pressure on my chest, shaking me awake. I looked over to the small shadow of Laura next to me, the silvery moonlight from our window casting an ethereal glow over her figure. Greg, wake up. Laura's voice sounded frightened and subdued. I could hear how scared Laura was, even underneath her hushed tone. What's going on? I asked, trying to wipe the sleep from my eyes. My body still felt exhausted from the physical work we had just finished. Then, I heard the downstairs door slam shut. I looked at Laura and held my breath, straining to hear if anything else in our home was making noise. All I could hear was the throbbing of my own heartbeat. The rest of the house was dead quiet. Not a single creak of the aged wooden floorboards broke the silence. "I'll go check it out," I whispered to Laura. She let go of my chest, and I lurched myself upward. I wished I had a gun, a bat, or anything I could use to defend myself, but all I had was the cushion on the floor for protection. I swallowed that feeling and pressed on. I slowly opened my bedroom door and crept downstairs. Nearly every step I took sent a loud creak echoing throughout the empty house. I kept telling myself that nothing could be inside our home and be this silent, not unless it was standing completely still. I entered our moonlit living room and flipped on the lights. Nothing. I pressed forward into the kitchen and did the same thing. Still nothing. Finally, I reached the foyer. I looked over to the front door and saw the locking latch still flipped toward the locked position. I felt my body relax. My shoulders slumped in relief. I took a deep breath and wandered back up into our bedroom. "There's no one down there. The door is still locked," I said. Laura just stared at me for a moment. "I know what I heard, Greg. Someone slammed that door shut." I could see the absolute resolve in her eyes. She fully believed what she had heard. "Listen, I don't know. Everything's locked up tight down there. No one's getting in without breaking down that door." I laid back down on the mattress next to my wife. She continued to stare toward our bedroom door, as if she expected something to break through it. Both of our physical fatigues hit their limits a few moments later, and we found ourselves asleep once again. But the same surprise came again and again, night after night. Laura would wake me up sometime just after 2 a.m. and tell me she heard our front door slam shut. I would head downstairs, see nothing, and check the lock to find everything in order. It wasn't until the evening of the fourth night, well after we had finished moving in, that I made a disturbing discovery about our door. The lock didn't actually work. No matter how hard I twisted the locking device, the lock wouldn't shift over. The door had been open every single night since we first moved in. I was at a crossroads. I could break the news to Laura and have her lose even more sleep than she already had. Or I could choose to handle things myself and buy a new deadbolt from the department store in the morning. So I did what I thought was best. I told Laura I would sleep on the couch that night and keep an eye on the door. I didn't tell her about the broken lock. She went upstairs to our bedroom while I lay down on the couch. I decided to grab a kitchen knife for safety, just in case. I took the biggest one I could find from our knife set. It felt like the scariest thing I could do. I could think of nothing else. I positioned our couch so that it faced the foyer, my gaze dead set on our front door. For the first few hours, I did my best to keep my eyes open, but a few hours in, my eyelids felt heavy. My mind had found itself halfway in dreamland and halfway in reality. So when I watched the barely lit front door slowly crack open, I couldn't gather the energy to move. Even when my brain screamed at me to do something, my body was paralyzed. I could only watch as the metal handle of the door slowly unlatched itself, and the thick wooden door creaked open. The darkness from outside spilled forward, casting strange shadows throughout our foyer. Despite my best efforts, I couldn't make out a single figure in the void outside. But I could see one thing. An arm extended its long fingers around the edge of our doorknob. It was gangly, with a pale red hue that seemed strangely colored, spindles of blackened veins linking themselves with knots of tumor-like growths all along its skin. The arm was so thin it could be confused for a discarded tree branch, yet It was impossibly long for its thin and atrophied frame. The hand alone had to have been at least 4 or 5 feet in length. Its upper arm was even longer, spreading deep into the darkness of the night outside. I couldn't even see the shoulder that the stick-like appendage should have been connected to. Half of the creature's body was completely hidden in the shadows. Meanwhile, I watched hopelessly as the door creaked open more and more. It had nearly reached the edges of its hinges before it paused. A few seconds passed before the fingers tightened around the brass door handle. With a single tug, the door flew backward. The full force of the wood slammed shut with such intensity that it shook the house. Finally, I snapped out of my paralysis. My heart raced, and I felt a cold sweat pour down my forehead. I heard my bedroom door bang open and the thudding of Laura's feet sprinting downstairs toward me. "Greg!" she yelled out as soon as she saw me. I looked at her, and I knew immediately she could see the smile on my face, the absolute fear reflected in her eyes. "Greg, what happened? Did you see anything?" I couldn't form the words. I just nodded. We stayed up the whole night with each other, the adrenaline keeping us alert. As soon as the department store opened, I made the drive over. Funnily enough, the local store didn't sell any type of door lock, but ever determined, I drove the extra hour to a big store and got exactly what I needed. By early afternoon, I was taking off the old lock and fixing on the new one. My tired mind barely comprehended the job I was doing. "Hello, friend," a raspy voice called out from behind me. I turned toward the blazing sun and saw the silhouette of John wearing his wide-brimmed hat right behind me. "What are you doing?" I sighed and continued working. "I'm fixing up our locks. I just noticed last night that they weren't working." I pushed my fingers against my eyelids, trying to force some of my exhaustion out. "I wouldn't worry about that. None of us ever lock up our doors," John said, continuing to stare down at me. I couldn't make out his face through the bright light that backlit his skinny figure. "Yeah, well, I'd just feel safer if I did," I muttered to myself. I grabbed the new lock and put it into the now empty hole of the front door. You see, the kindness of an open policy is what makes this neighborhood safe. It always has been, ever since I was a kid. A lot of people had to get hurt to understand that. A silence enveloped us as I went about my work. "Gregory," he said, his tone shifting, "if you finish what you're doing, you're going to get yourself and your wife hurt." I paused, the weight of his words sinking in. The sun hung high above us, but a chill crept up my spine as I realized that perhaps the safety I sought was not as simple as locking a door. I can't say much more than that, but you need to trust in your neighbors. I scoffed under my breath before turning toward John. I made a covering for my eyes using my hands. The temporary shade helped me see the deep look on my neighbor's face. "Listen, John, I get it. You're a close community here, but we've been having problems with our front door opening since we got here. That's stopping tonight." John slowly shook his head in disappointment. "I can't force someone to have good manners. Compelled kindness is no hospitality." I felt like he knew more than he was letting on. "What's going on here?" I whispered up to the old man. "It's unbecoming to talk about someone behind their back," he replied, pausing for a moment. "Mary's making a pie for you tonight. I'll leave it on your porch. Don't eat it. It's for your guests tonight." John took a deep breath and mumbled, "I hope it'll be enough," under his breath. The old man swung his back toward me and began to walk back to his house. I ignored him and fixed up the door, making sure it locked tight. As soon as I was finished, sure enough, just a few hours after Laura returned home, we had a knock on our door. I opened it to find a large, steaming fresh apple pie resting on our stoop. A small card lay near it, reading, "For the guests of Gregory and Laura Adams from the neighborhood of Haydenfield. We apologize for making you feel unwelcome tonight. Please accept our deepest apologies. Very kindly, the Clarks. P.S. Gregory, a good dessert should always be set out on your kitchen table in case any guests make a surprise visit. May you have room on your dining room table to place this in case that may happen. God bless, John." Laura and I exchanged strange glances. "What's all that about?" she asked, flipping the card around in her hand. "No idea," I replied, studying the pie in my hands. The aroma wafted over our home in the most pleasant of ways. "Should we have a slice?" Laura leaned down and smelled the apple cinnamon scent that had spread from the glaze inside. I pulled it away from her. Something in me told me that John knew something we didn't. I had no idea what was going on, but I knew what the card said, and I knew what I had seen the night prior. "Let's just leave it on the table tonight. We can double check with the Clarks tomorrow, just to make sure they actually made it. Otherwise, I don't know if we can trust it." I tried my best to explain it away, but Laura gave me a wary look. Thankfully, she shrugged it off. I placed the card and the pie right in the center of the dining room table and headed upstairs. Laura managed to fall asleep before I did that night. I felt my eyes staring deep holes into the darkness, no sense of sleep washing over me. I could only think of that strange, crooked arm I had seen the night prior. Like clockwork, just after 2 a.m., I heard a jingle come from my downstairs hall. The doorknob was shaking. It was slow at first, but then grew more frantic. I gripped onto my bed covers and prayed that the lock would keep whatever that thing was away. But as the door handle jiggled more and more fiercely, that prayer fell away. I could hear the door beginning to thud in its frame as something lurched against it. At this point, Laura must have heard it as well. She shot up in bed and looked over at me. "Greg, what the hell is that?" Something began crashing against the door. A chorus of strange sounds began yelling from outside our home, their harmony making an ethereal echo that filled every inch of our space. I glanced over to our bedroom window and saw several spider-like hands pressed against the glass. Their skin was the same twisted red hue I had seen the night prior. Their gnarled fingers pressed so tightly against the glass that it began to crack under their grip. The same cracking noise filled our home as every window began to experience the same fate. Laura's eyes focused on the gangly hands outside, tears welling up in her eyes as her voice faltered into a low whimper. I didn't know what to do, so I reached over to her and pulled her tight against my chest. "Don't look at them," I whispered to her over and over again. I wasn't sure if I was speaking to her or to myself. I heard the front door splinter open under the weight of something incredibly massive. A huge tundra of thudding and thumping filled the lower floor. Soon followed the sounds of every window in our home bursting open one by one. I squinted my eyes open for just a moment to see the bedroom window crack and burst into shards of glass. Broken shards flew toward me and my wife. I closed my eyes to protect them from the slivers of flying glass. The hands from outside began to stretch their way into our home, seeming to lurch in our direction as if they could see us. I closed my eyes again and began praying. The thing from downstairs had found its way into our kitchen. The sounds of cabinets clattering open and shut created a symphony of chaos that echoed through the halls of our home. I was left waiting for the feeling of those lanky hands to wrap around me, preparing myself to be dragged out of my home at any moment, pulled through the broken glass-filled window and into the mouth of whatever those arms belonged to. But instead, I was greeted by silence. The banging had stopped. All the noises had ceased. I could hear Laura crying in my arms, but that was it. I opened my eyes and saw nothing more than the broken window of my bedroom greeting me. Quickly, I picked up a large piece of glass and wrapped it in one of my socks before getting to my feet. Room by room, I cleared every window in our home. Every single one was broken. I got to our front door and saw its frame totally knocked off its hinges. Broken splinters of wood lay scattered across the wooden floor. Yet the thing that got me the most was that the pie was gone. We stopped locking up our doors after that night. Now we're always prepared to entertain any guests that might show up, no matter the time.